Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us this morning. Before the Chancellor begins, let me set out some ground rules. First, the Chancellor will start off with a few remarks for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we will ask you to come up. If you have questions that you would like to ask the Chancellor, come up and come to one of the two microphones, one here, one over here. And then wait to be acknowledged so that we don't have two people trying to speak at the same time. And then quickly ask your question or make your brief comment. If your question or your comment goes on and on and on and on, I will stop you. So please be brief, because the goal is to get as many people as possible up and able to ask and have a discussion with the Chancellor about the governor's proposal and so forth. And then the other question, the other point I want to raise too is that what we would like to do is let everyone have a chance to come up. So don't come up to the microphone a second time or a third time or a fourth time until everybody else has had a chance first to come up to the microphone. All right? So those are the ground rules, and now let me introduce the Chancellor of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Chancellor Rebecca Blank.
Thank you very much, Joellen. I'm assuming everyone can hear me. If you can't, if you can't, jump up and down. Thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your willingness to participate in the conversation, in sort of the shared governance discussions about what's happening right now and how we might be responding. The reason for this forum, as you all know, is to have a conversation about the budget proposals that are in front of the legislature and what its impact might be on Wisconsin and what the implications of that are going to be for all of us. So let me start by making the most important comment, which is there's an enormous amount we don't know. And the main reason there's a lot we don't know is that at this point we simply have a proposal on the table from the governor. It's been sent to the legislature. The process at this point is it starts debate and discussion inside the legislature. The key actor is the joint Finance Committee between the Assembly and the Senate. They will probably be meeting and holding hearings on this in late March, early April. They will present a budget to both the Assembly and the Senate, which will then be voted on by late May or early June. So we're in a long-term process. As I've said to a lot of people, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. You can't get too excited about any comment that's made on any one day. That's all about positioning, right? And the main issue is to keep focused on the main points that we want to make and that we want to get up to the governor and to the legislature about where we are and what the impacts are and what really needs to happen, what sort of budget we need to live with. So moving forward, as we get more information on specifics as issues come and go, we've created a website called budget.wisc.edu. We are putting up a frequently asked questions document, and some of the questions that are coming out in these forums are guiding, so we're going to be adding to that as new questions arise. Up on that is, if you really have nothing better to do, you could watch my Thursday presentation from last week to the Board of Regents, and other information that we have about the budget will be there. As you probably know, I'm holding a number of these forums. I held one late Wednesday night with primarily our second and third shift workers. We did one yesterday afternoon, this morning, and next week we're going to do one with graduate students, and the week after that we'll do one focused primarily on undergraduates and invite whatever students want to come and talk. So that's where we're going, okay? That's sort of what's happening. Let me take just a minute to lay out the proposals that are in front of us and what I think the impacts are likely to be as those proposals have at least in the first round been put forward. And sort of put some facts out and get us all on the same table, and then we can open up for conversation, because most of this time I hope we can just talk back and forth. Let me start by saying what's probably the most important thing I'm going to say this morning, which is thank you to all of you, not just for coming this morning, but for the work that you do day in and day out. I know how much of a difference your work makes to this university and to the state, and I deeply appreciate it, and there are many, many people as well, both in the university and around the state, who do appreciate it. there's a lot of roles at the university. There are researchers, teachers, custodians, outreach specialists, administrative assistants, steam fitters, student services staff. I could keep going for a long time. And all of those jobs are an important part of this community. We couldn't function without any of them. And I can't say, I don't say, and you often don't hear thank you enough for everything that you do. The university's weathered a lot of storms, and those of you who know a little bit of the history of the university know we've been through these sorts of things before, where there were proposals that people at the university weren't very happy about coming at us from the legislature or from the governor. And we've survived those past storms, so we're going to survive this one. And my first and most, beyond saying thank you, the second most important thing that I can say is, yes, we're all in this together, but we're going to get through this. And we're going to maintain the University of Wisconsin here at Madison at the same level of quality and the same level of national and global presence and the same outreach to the state that we've been doing for a long, long time. Okay, but having said all of that, there are going to be budget cuts. We're going to argue over how much, but given the first round magnitude of the cuts that have been proposed, I would be really astonished if there aren't some cuts. And yes, we're going to try to make them lower rather than higher, but I think realistically, we've got to be planning. I've got to be planning as the head of the institution for how we're going to handle some amount of cuts this year. It's also important for me to say that I think that these cuts are not the result of any particular deal. And I know that people in the press have sometimes been talking about this, that you're trading off this public authority flexibility for higher budget cuts. My strong impression of the deal that was on the table is either $300 million in budget cuts plus some opportunity of additional flexibilities with the public authority, or $300 million in budget cuts. And in many ways, I think about the cuts, as I'm going to say in a minute, and the public authority as two somewhat different issues. One is very short term, and one is much more long term. So let me talk about just a little bit of mathematics. What are these cuts? You've all been reading about a $300 million proposed cut. That's biennial math. That means that is a cut spread across the 2 years of the biennium. The cut for any 1 year would be $150 million a year. That's to the system as a whole. Our share of that is a little less than 40%, so it's a little below $60 million, okay? Now, in addition, what hasn't been as much talked about is there are other cuts as well in this budget beyond that $150 million a year, some of them targeted specifically at Madison, some of them across the system. For instance, one of the things in here is the removal of matching money from the state to our Wisconsin Bioenergy Initiative. That by itself takes $3.5 million away that we made a commitment to the federal government. We were going to have that matching money. We have to pay that. So there's probably, as we're looking at it now, another $10 to $15 million in cuts in addition to the $60 million that's part of the 150. Now, in addition to that, the bad news is not yet over. As some of you know, we had a cut 2 years ago, and we were explicitly told by the legislature, don't take that cut. Fill it with your reserves. We want you to pull down your reserve dollars, okay? So we did not take the cut we were handed 2 years ago. We filled the hole with reserve dollars. We've now used up all of the reserve dollars that we can validly use up. So I'm sitting on a $23 million cut from 2 years ago that we were planning to take at the beginning of this biennium in any case. So if you add up about 60 million, another 10 to 15, the 23 that's we're carrying over from 2 years ago, we have between 90 and $100 million in cuts that we are going to be dealing with. And ideally, we're supposed to have those all taken care of and out of our budget by July 1st of this coming year, right, of this year. As I have said in multiple forums, that the cuts are too big. We can't handle this. It's not good for the university. It's not good for the state. These are simply too big, okay? The budget hole facing the university to give a sense of how big $90 to $100 million is. If we eliminated the 5 smallest schools on campus, just sort of wiped them out immediately, that would be business, law, nursing, pharmacy, and veterinary medicine. We would not have filled the hole. Or if you don't want to get rid of the small schools, we could get rid of 2 medium-sized schools. We could wipe off the face of the map engineering and the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and that would not fill the hole. Now, we're not going to take either of those 2 actions, but I use that as an indication of how big this proposed cut is and how unmanageable a cut of this size, this fast, is to the university. as I emphasized, we're not going to know what the final number is until the outcome of all of this legislative process in late May and early June. But in the meantime, we have to do planning. And there are 3 things we're going to be doing to fill this budget hole at whatever the cuts come down. The first one, new revenues, okay? As many of you know, there is a tuition freeze that has been in place the last 2 years, and a tuition freeze that will be ongoing on in-state undergraduates, okay? But that doesn't cover some other students. We I am going to be going to the regions together with our financial people and some of the deans and requesting several different tuition increases. We're going to request tuition increases for our out-of-state students, and we're going to request some tuition increases for our professional schools. Now, the good news, speaking solely as an economist, not from the point of view of out-of-state students, is our out-of-state tuition is actually relatively low. We're something like the 3rd lowest in the Big Ten. And we aren't the 3rd worst school in the Big Ten for people coming from outside. We are one of the best schools in the Big Ten. So we've actually got some market power to move up. In addition, our admissions have been growing enormously from outside the state. So your chances of getting admitted to the University of Wisconsin, if you're an out-of-state applicant, are below 20%. All of which says we could raise our prices out of state, not hurt our quality. We've got an enormous admission pool that's not being served there. And that is one way in which we can get some additional revenues. The professional schools, there's a number of professional schools whose tuition is way below the median, even among, even in the Big Ten among their peers. So, the anecdote I like to use here, the School of Veterinary Medicine, their out-of-state tuition right now is below the in-state tuition at the University of Illinois. So we've got students from Illinois coming here because it's cheaper to come here out of state than to stay in state in Illinois. This makes no sense, right? And trying to, those are things we should be working on even if we weren't facing budget problems, in part because, to be honest, it's not a competitive advantage to being the cheapest school in the country. Students look at that and say, this mustn't be very good. I can't get the services that I need here. Price in a little bit is, at least in part, a signal of quality. So asking for some tuition increases for out-of-state students for a few of our professional schools is on the table. In addition, I'm going to be talking to the regents about raising our cap on out-of-state students. Many of you know we have a regental cap of 27.5% on the percentage of our admits who can come from out of state. And I'm going to propose to raise that from 27.5% to 30%. Not a huge change, but also one that increases the number of out-of-state students on campus. In addition to new revenues, we're also going to be looking at budget cuts. And I actually should say something about the new revenues because I want to put these in context. We're talking about a $92 million potential budget hole, okay? The increases in tuition that I'm discussing would get us about $18 million. Raising that out-of-state cap from 27.5 to 30 would get us about $18 million. So that says pushing as far as I can in 1 year on tuition, maybe further than I even should, I'm only going to get $36 million out of a $90 million hole. This doesn't begin to fill the hole, and the fact that we could have some movement on those tuition levels doesn't begin to justify this level of price cut. We're budget cut. We're still facing serious problems. So we're going to have to look at budget cuts in addition to that. As most of you here know, the state dollars don't flow all through the university. The state dollars are primarily focused in our educational programs. The research programs aren't funded by state dollars at all. You guys know that who raised those dollars. They're funded largely by the federal government and some other foundations. So the problem here is you don't want to focus all the cuts just in the schools and colleges on the educational programs. You want to spread them to other parts of the university. And that is partly what we've been looking at as we've been looking at these cuts. Now, within the schools and colleges, we're going to rely on the deans and the directors to decide how the cuts are going to be made. We're going to give them, say, you're going to have to cut by a certain percentage, and you come back to us and tell us what it is you want to do. And many of you know we've already done some budget cutting exercises, which should set people up to have a pretty good sense of how they're going to move forward. But many of you can be part of the sort of the governance and discussion processes inside your school and colleges as these cuts get finalized. We're going to do everything we can with lapses in positions. But I'm just going to tell you that from the magnitude of these cuts, there are going to be layoffs. And I was quoted today in the paper saying something I said yesterday, which is my guess is there are going to be some layoff notices going out this spring by late March or early April. And I really wish I didn't have to say that, particularly to our staff, who are going to be the most impacted by this. But it is what it is in the face of this budget cut. I will also note that we are committed, and I think this is very important, that the administrative units are going to take a higher budget cut than the schools and colleges. And but at the end of the day, these cuts are going to touch every corner of campus. So we don't have specifics right now on what the cuts are going to be. That is what the deans are working on. We're working on with other units. Over the next month or two, it will become clearer, and we will start rolling some things out as they do become clear. But right now, I just can't answer your question if you're going to say, is my unit going to be affected? I just don't know. And I suspect your dean and director doesn't fully know yet either, because we are still in the midst of putting this all together. And then, when you're talking about cuts, one of the things that often comes up is how much the university may be inefficient, and there's just a lot of fat to be trimmed, okay? So we're a big institution, and we're a bureaucratic institution, and there are always some things that you can run more efficiently. I suspect any of you could name them inside this institution. But I will also say we are not a bloated institution. We're big, but we're big because we've got 43,000 students and a $1.1 billion research enterprise. And big does not necessarily mean inefficient. I was really struck coming to this university from other places at this being the leanest place that I've ever been, and the numbers bear me out. There are comparable estimates of sort of administrative overhead across different universities, and we're very near the bottom on those estimates. That doesn't mean there aren't efficiencies to be gained. There aren't ways to make cuts that in some cases are maybe things we should be doing anyway. But I can't take the amount of money in this budget cut by trimming fat, because there just isn't that sort of fat in the university. And those of you who are out there in the units, I think, know that. Finally, so if we're going to talk about revenue raising, we're going to talk about budget cuts. The third thing we're going to look at, the first revenue raising I was talking about was raising money off of students, is to look at other revenue raisers internally. Where else can we pull money back that's already out there inside in other units, that may not be used very much or lower priority use. So we are going to be doing some pulling revenue back towards the center to help fill these cuts. And for instance, those of you who are on federal research grants, we're talking about increasing the tuition remission amounts that grants that pay graduate students pay back to the university. We're really quite low on that. The federal government would let us take much higher payments off of those grants. Ideally you wouldn't want to do that, but in this situation, it's a way to spread some of the effects of these cuts onto the research grants and take what the federal government absolutely allows us to do, which is to charge higher tuition remission. We're going to be talking about taking a central cut off of revenue generating programs and using that to fill this budget hole. We haven't been doing that in the past, and we'll be rolling that out in the next few months. So that's an example of the sort of internal revenue raising things that we are talking about. So tuition increases and changes in the cap, budget cuts, and looking for other ways to pull some revenue to fill the hole. That's what we're talking about. And even if you do all of that and you do all of those estimates, we're somewhere around 55 million. And I'm still about $40 million short for this year, okay? And I got to go find that somewhere. The most obvious place to go is reserves. We have pulled down reserves steadily for the last 2 years. We currently have about $54 million in what is designated as open reserves, undesignated reserves, that is not allocated for specific purposes and already earmarked. $54 million in reserves with a $40 million budget hole that has to be filled from reserves is really a scary situation. And the result is we are continuing to look for some additional funding and other money. Okay, that's if we have to take the full cut. Finally, let me say a word about the public authority, which is the other piece of this. And I want to separate it. The budget cuts are immediate. We have to deal with them in the next 2 years. The public authority is something that's rolling out over time. And even if you say we're going to set it up tomorrow, it's going to roll out over time. You cannot restructure the entire system and the way it operates without taking time, being thoughtful, and doing it right. So the current plan is that this would be set up July 1st, 2016. It would be governed by the same Board of Regents who would transform into the governing body of the public authority. The movement to a public authority puts us outside of the state. You know, we're still under control of the state, but we're no longer a state agency. And that means that Chapter 36, which governs us as a state agency, disappears. Now, there's some things in Chapter 36, quite honestly, I'm very glad to see gone, such as it micromanages what we can charge for undergraduate admission applications. I don't understand why that's written in state statute. But there are things in Chapter 36 we all care a lot about. Most importantly, the shared governance and, you know, sort of the whole discussion of protections around tenure. I am very certain that the Board of Regents, if this all moves forward in May or June, will take action so that those sorts of provisions are put into regental statute as soon as the new public authority would be set up, and that they will adopt the language virtually identically from Chapter 36 into regental statute. Now, most universities in the country run under regental statute, not under state statute. So this would put us on a par with most other schools, and this is a successful way to operate in those schools. So I think this is a very doable shift, but I know it's a shift that gives a lot of people a lot of worry. And you know, I am quite sure that you and everyone else, if the regents don't do that, and I'm going to be with you, are going to go call them to account. But I've talked with the regents, and they really understand the importance of adopting this immediately into regental statute if and when Chapter 36 disappears. We all remain public employees, but are no longer state employees. But as public employees, we will continue with all of the health care and all of the state pensions. And I know a lot of people are worried about what happens to their benefits, and we still remain in all of the state pools for pensions and health care. One of the advantages of the public authority is some management flexibilities. It gives us much greater control over procurement, greater control over how we manage construction projects. Down the road, there are going to be ways to save a little bit of money with that. But it's going to take us at least 2 to 3 years to restructure, put systems in place, and hire the expertise we need to do things this university simply hasn't had to do in the past. And I think we can do them more efficiently than we do while operating as a state agency right now, but they're not going to help us at all with the short-term budget cuts. They just can't. It's going to take time to put those flexibilities in place and figure out how we use them well. So how are we responding? We're trying to mobilize in a number of ways. I've spent a lot of time this week, next week, at the other end of State Street, talking with some of the key legislators about this. Our University Alumni Association sent letters out to all of our Wisconsin alumni last week, sort of saying, you know, we're facing some really significant budget challenges. If you feel like contacting your legislators, we hope you will. We did something we've never done before. We sent a letter out to all of our parents of Wisconsin students as well. I know that our legislative affairs people are working with profs, with ASPRO, with the student legislative affairs to try to coordinate our messaging down there. And we're doing some targeted outreach to various business and civic leaders to go to state political leaders and say, look, you know, I'm from the business community, and you don't want to harm the higher education system in this way. If you are so inclined to help, I certainly encourage you to be in touch with your elected officials. Let me be very clear that you cannot use state resources or state time for any advocacy. So this would have to be something done on your own time with whatever message you want to carry. Showing the value of your work, talking about what happens here on campus, why it's valuable to the state, is really effective. And I know there have been a couple of op-eds out there by some of our faculty or staff that I just think have been really well written. And if you are in a position to be able to do something like that, and we're so inclined to do it, I'd encourage you to think about that. We're trying to carry 3 messages, and these are the messages. We've been testing messages around the state. These are the messages that I'm trying to deliver. Number 1, the cuts are just too big for the university, too big for the state. Number 2, these cuts will impact the quality of education for your children around the state here at the University of Wisconsin. And that's something that resonates with parents and citizens all through the state. And number 3, you are jeopardizing the investments that generations of Wisconsin students have made to make the University of Wisconsin, particularly here in Madison, a world-class university. And calling upon that history of 166 years of investment in this university by the state is also something that really resonates with a lot of people. So those three messages are the messages that I'm bringing. We are obviously all in this together. We need to work together, and I'm going to appreciate all of the help that you bring. Obviously, I can only do so much, and we're going to need to coordinate if we really are going to be effective at reducing some of these cut levels. So let me turn things over to Joellen, and let's go into questions and comments. Thank you.
So please come up if you've got a question for the Chancellor. Introduce yourself if you'd like. If longer you stand here, I might have to break out into song or dance or something.
You don't
like
want that.
We really don't want to see that happen this morning. So please, somebody, bail me out. Come up. Come out. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Someone's going to have a question. Thank you.
I'm Kevin Gallus. I'm a research specialist here.
Can you all hear him? No. So you need to, maybe we need to put this up. It is green.
Yeah, just speak into the mic closely. Be fine.
All right. Well, my name's Kevin Gallus. I'm a research specialist. I work here in the building. I've identified possibly $10 million of savings for the institution, but I've been trying to work on it for the past year and a half and have gotten little or no response. I don't know how to advance that type of savings. I've tried a number of options, but these are some efficiencies in the lab and in procurement. But I'm struggling with how to bring that forward.
Thank you, and I'm hoping all of you are going to be doing what he's been doing. First of all, we are putting up a website at which we invite people to send forward comments or issues, but specifically, where's Daryl? I'm going to tell you to be in touch with Daryl Bazell, who is our Vice Chancellor for Finance and Administration, and you can talk to him after this forum and about some of the things you're looking at. Some of the procurement things we might not be able to do until we're actually more flexible on the procurement rules that we can operate, but I appreciate that, and talk to Daryl afterwards. We are encouraging people who live out there often have ideas about ways to run more efficiently, and we do want to hear some of those ideas. Some will be doable, some won't, but we do want to hear them. Brian, did you have a question? I saw you getting up.
Please come up.
First of all, thank you very much for your clear speech to the Faculty Senate and to the Regents. I think they were quite useful. My question has to do with regarding your comment on the cut is too deep to apply just to the educational part of the university. And maybe you could give us some thoughts at what's developing with the deans and directors of how to prioritize within units.
So every unit has its own unique issues, and in that sense, we've got a strong dean system here that the deans largely do run their own units, and I'm expecting them to do the prioritization. I think I've been pretty clear with them that across-the-board cuts are usually not the right way, to nick a little bit off of everybody. We've got excellent programs and programs that might, perhaps a little bit of nicking won't hurt as much. But let me be very clear. When we talk about prioritization, there are programs that are probably closer to our core missions of education and teaching and outreach, and that we can have a comparative advantage in delivering. There are a lot of programs that we do that might be a little further away from those missions. That doesn't mean that they are ineffective or useless programs. Everything we do at this university is a benefit to some group of students or part of our community, right? And what makes this painful is that prioritization inevitably involves ranking some things, and there are going to be some places, therefore, that get deeper cuts than others. And that's not a statement of the value of that activity. It's sort of a statement of how central it is to the core part of the school or college. But the deans and directors really have first say in what, how they're going to prioritize things and how they're going to implement these cuts. And we're going to be passing letters down to them in the next week or so. My guess is that most of those schools or colleges are going to be asked to absorb about a 6% cut over this next 2 years. That's about the order of magnitude we're talking about. It will vary a little across programs. There's some schools who are asking to take slightly deeper cuts, some schools who are asking to take slightly smaller cuts. And then I say we're going to take, on average, deeper cuts in the administrative units, and we're doing everything we can to spread this to other parts of the university that may not get the state 101 funds, but that, in one form or another are financially connected to the places that do get those funds. Is that helpful? Yeah.
Please.
We have a question about how the layoff is going to affect the custodian department. Do you have any idea on that?
So as I say, we do not have specifics on any of the layoff plans. The directors and the heads of units are really working on that. So I can't say to you, this, in this building, this is going to happen. That we just aren't at that level of specificity yet. I know, many of you know, is that there are an awful lot of custodian staffs that are already working shorthanded, that there are unfilled jobs. And if there are going to have to be additional cuts, we're going to have to change the workload and change the expectations. So it might be that there's only one large garbage can in the hallway, and everyone's expected to empty their own garbage into that, and you don't have room-by-room service. That sort of thing is we're going to have to be looking at in some cases. And I'm acutely aware that our custodial staff is already running shorthanded. If we have to run it even more shorthanded in places, we have to change the workload. What we can't do is say fewer people, but hey, keep doing the same amount of work. But we really don't have specifics yet.
So, Chancellor, Tim Donahue from Bacteriology. One of the mechanisms you talked about to increase revenue was to change the tuition remission rate. That rate and that model was put in place by a drink water committee almost 10 years ago now. And when that was put in place, it leveled the playing field, so all assistants, TAs, RAs, and PAs would all be charged the same rate. When you talked about it in the context of the research enterprise. Are you planning to raise the rate for all graduate tuition remission?
Yes.
Or only a fraction?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep, Vince Burleski, I work in the CALS Research Division. We do budgeting on all of our grants. Many of the things we're applying for today are going to be funded after July 1. Do you have an idea of what that tuition remission rate would be so we can accurately budget today?
We're going to be rolling this out, and I don't know, Daryl, do you want to speak to the timing of this? We know we have to do this as soon as possible.
Yeah, there's something we're beginning to work on right now. And what we're looking at is maybe another 1,000 on top of the 4 that's in place right now. The one thing I want to emphasize is we can't do this based upon new submissions. This has to be across the board, which means that for many of our research communities, we're going to have to amend the budgets that they have. And that's probably the bigger impact here.
We have a question that we're going to take from back here.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think that's on. Try the other one. Yeah.
That's better.
Yeah,
Thank
good.
you for working hard on all of our behalfs. Many of us have been here for a very long time, and this place means a lot to us. And so I appreciate you working so hard for us and for the institution. I'm wondering if you can comment on a piece that was in the paper this morning about a proposal to rescind immediately current merit and retention raises. Do you have any information about that?
I read that article too, and it's the first and only thing I've heard about it, and Daryl and I haven't even had a chance to talk, where, we don't know what that means at this point. Clearly, if it would mean that we couldn't match outside offers, that, believe me, we'd go on the warpath about that. Yeah. Daryl, do you want to? Yeah.
Yeah, the only thing I can think that might relate to is merit raises that, discretionary raises that affect classified staff that the state has decided they would freeze that program and not consider approving any additional ones that have not already gone through the process. I believe that's what this might relate to.
We have a question back here.
Julie Zachman, Fusion Technology Institute. Is this on?
It's on, but let's use this one. It's better.
Fusion Technology Institute. I don't know if you said something before I came in, but is there any decision about how long people would have to look for a job if they did get a layoff notice?
Yeah, we face all sorts of rules and regulations about what sort of layoff notice you have to give in advance notice. It's about 6 months. That varies a little for different categories of employees. So when I say we're looking at things like announcing layoffs in April, that would mean sending out layoff letters that then wouldn't actually go into effect until 6 months later. We're also talking about ways to create a resume pool so that if you were laid off here, but there is an opening at some point in another part of the university with your sorts of skills, that you are on the list to be interviewed and have some priority for interviewing trying to create that type of opportunity for people who might be looking for jobs. And I'm saying again, I don't know at this point what the magnitudes of layoffs are likely to be. I'm expecting that there are going to be some layoffs that pretty much go across the university in most units of the university, given the magnitude of this cut. And given we have to take this next year, that means it is this spring that we're going to have to be sending some notices out with the 6-month advance notice. But we'll follow, everyone is state employees at this point. We will be following all the state rules on layoffs for anything that happens this spring.
A question back here.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Chancellor Blank. I'm a graduate of here, I've worked for 20 years. I really I want to understand why we have to be talking about layoffs and why we can't think outside the box. You mentioned a 6% cut. I will take a 6% cut on my salary. If we could set something up progressively, imagine the press that we would get if this is the way we responded as an institution. I mean, we care about a living wage here on campus. If we structured a progressive cut, maybe we can't do it because of state rules. Maybe we set something up voluntarily to save our colleagues. I care about everybody in this room, everybody across the campus. And I really want us to think about those options if we can, please. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that comment. And people have asked me, well, why don't we use furloughs? Why don't we do things like that? Yeah. Part of the problem here is we face these cuts, they're permanent cuts. Furloughs are things that you use often when you've got a bad year, but once you get through it, you're all right. It's very hard to do furloughs on a more permanent basis. We will certainly look at the question about, voluntary salary decreases. The problem is, again, that would have to be voluntary, and I really worry. Even people with the best of intentions about turning part of their salary back over time are going to be sitting there saying, wait a minute, other people are doing this job, they're doing it at a higher rate of pay than I am. What's going on here? And we're just going to start losing really good people. That is a problem with that approach. But again, it's on our
Chancellor, just one additional point related to that. The mechanism you would probably have to use is actually reducing your FTE percentage. To do that, just to be clear, you would still have to invoke a formal layoff procedure to lower your FTE percentage. So just at least understand that. But it is a good idea, and I think there are schools and colleges that are considering that as an option. But to understand, you would still have to probably trigger a layoff process to affect that type of outcome.
We have a question back here, Chancellor.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chancellor. Is a similar presentation to these being presented at other campuses, both 2- and 4-year, especially with a aim at the public? Because it seems like outside of this area, there's definitely a kind of an off with their heads type of mentality among the public when it comes to this.
So my understanding is that most of the other schools, the chancellors are doing some, various ways to reach out and talk about the implications of these budget cuts. Some, whether everyone's holding these sorts of forums, I don't know. There's been a lot of activism in Milwaukee and on that campus in expressing concern about the cuts. And, we obviously keep up with the state newspapers. The same is true on a number of other areas where there are, I've been following the 4-year schools more so than the 2-year schools. I am hoping that the system is going to help coordinate some of these responses. What happens on campus is one thing, but coordinating the response and the messaging back to legislators. We've sent out letters to our alumni. I believe Milwaukee has done that. I think there's at least 1 or 2 other schools that have. Personally, I would hope that every school sends out letters to its alumni, because in many cases, it's going to be letters from our alumni or other school alumni in districts that aren't Dane County and Madison that are going to go to some of the real leaders in the legislature right now and are going to matter. So, I'm trying to do what I can to coordinate that, but a lot of that has to come through the system.
Question over here.
Yeah.
Yes, Chancellor. First of all, thank you for taking a strong public stand against the cuts, and we appreciate that. My question has to do with sort of the public perception and the question of people not understanding what it is that faculty actually do here. There was an article again this morning about essentially saying that the cuts would be more difficult for Platteville or River Falls because their faculty are already pulling their weight in terms of teaching. And if I talk to the average person in my neighborhood, their reaction is, their tax dollars fully fund my research program. My kids get free tuition and free room and board. I get free football and basketball tickets. And I fish and sit at the beach in the summer. And how do we sort of help people?
If you get free football tickets, the other people here want to talk to you. Yeah.
what we actually do here
Yeah.
at a top research
Yeah.
institution
Yeah.
is really not something that the average citizen, I think, has an appreciation for.
You know, we've had these conversations with our communications group over the last week or two because I am very concerned about the extent to which people seem to think that attacking university faculty is a way to move this state forward. We almost surely have not done a very good job of talking about in a way that people who aren't around universities can understand, what the job is that university faculty do. And it's a hard one to talk about because it's not, the one thing that you can sort of go film and measure is the hours in the classroom. And anyone who's been a faculty member knows how many hours outside the classroom are devoted to education, much less let's talk about the research enterprise here and how many research dollars people bring in. And there are a number of ways in which we are planning to try to and I have to say, I think that, we can talk about aggregate numbers of course loads and all. That's not a very effective way to talk. What's really matters here is anecdotes of individuals. You might look at it and say, well, look, they're only teaching one course a year. This is outrageous. And then look at everything else they do. Look at the dollars they bring in. Look at the lab that they're supporting. I had someone come up to me at church on Sunday who I didn't know, who said, look, I work at Cal's. And I essentially think of myself as a small business entrepreneur. I have a lab of 15 people. I've got to keep the money flowing or those people become unemployed. I'm always under the gun for that. People don't understand what this job is like. And we need to tell that story. And I've got some pretty good, he's a very good videographer sitting who's been passing the mic around over there, Peter, and a great communication team, some of whom are sitting over here. And we're really going to try to do some things around that. But again, I encourage all of you to think about what type of mechanisms you have to talk about your job and the hours you put in and the contributions it makes through through whatever channels you might have, and work with your communications people inside your own schools and colleges, because I think it's as important for Cal's and the law school to reach out to their alums and tell the stories of what their faculty do as anything that I do more centrally. This is one we've all got to work on. Thank you.
Chancellor, I have a question over here.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you again for being here and talking to us about this important issue. Someone mentioned earlier the importance of people outside of Dane County and Milwaukee County being involved. And I think that in those anecdotes that you talk about, it's important to show not only how your research or what you do at the university affects the economy here in this county around Madison, but how it affects every citizen of Wisconsin. And I think also the other thing, I was pleased to hear you say that you're working with the system, UW system, because I know you're, Chancellor of UW-Madison but working with the system and supporting the entire system, including the UW colleges, that reach individuals in more remote places is so important. And if we can reach the people in those places, that could make a big difference.
And this is one way where the system has a lot more power than any of our schools individually. While we have the advantage of having alumni everywhere in the state, we're not a regional school. The fact that you can add our alumni onto the alumni of all the other schools, and if we can actually get them to express concern about this budget, that's a very powerful force.
Anyone else with any questions? It's 10:15 Central Time and 11:15 Eastern Time over here. Are there any other questions?
Back
Yes?
here.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Gabrielle. I'm an undergraduate. Would you be able to speak on if there will be any cuts made or how it will affect students that are relying on scholarships?
Yeah, so thank you. One of the things that we've been trying to message is the impact of these cuts on the educational program, and that's something I think that everyone who has children who've been here or want to come here or grandchildren want to come here understand. When you start cutting the university, you start, here's the things that start happening. And I always think about this as running the Madison Initiative for Undergraduates in reverse. Some of you know that 6-7 years ago, my predecessor, Biddy Martin, got some increases in tuition with the agreement that she would plow that directly back into undergraduate education to decrease time to degree, which had been drifting up. And we took that money, and over time, we put it in increasing advising, in increasing hiring faculty on those big introductory courses where there were bottlenecks, and we very substantially increased financial aid available from this institution to students. The result of that, you can see in the data as that money starts being spent, time to graduation starts come after drifting up for a number of years, is now down to back to where it was 3 or 4 decades ago. Our retention rates are from our first to second year are at the highest they've ever been. And even better news, our retention rate for historically disadvantaged students is at exactly the same point as our retention rate for all students. And those two lines converge. It's investing in education when you do it right can actually produce real results. And my worry about these sorts of cuts is that we're going to be a little bit reducing the advising load, a little bit reducing the access to those big introductory classes. It's going to be tougher to cover everyone with financial aid. All of the extracurricular things that we offer our students that are part of what makes us a really top quality school, things like overseas internships, overseas study abroad internships, public service efforts, all of those are just going to get squeezed a little, and all of that together reduces access. If your question is specifically about financial aid, again, we're not at a level of detail where I can say where we are, and I'm going to try to preserve financial aid dollars more than anything else because I know how important they are. But like I say, it's going to be hard to leave very much untouched if we really have this full magnitude of budget cuts.
Question back here.
Yeah.
Good morning. First, I want to thank you for your availability and transparency. It's refreshing. My name is Nick Yakovich. I'm at the School of Social Work. And as I was sitting, I was thinking we provide a lot of interns and services to a variety across the state, actually, with our part-time program of services, and not only that, but a pool of employees for state agencies as well as nonprofits, and I'm sure there are a lot of other schools that do the same. And I wonder if the university is looking at allyship with some of the other state agencies that I'm sure are being hit by cuts, as advocates, not necessarily giving us the money, but advocates to the governor about the implied cost of these cuts.
Yeah, no, thank you. And we are trying to reach out to a number of different places that we think are going to be affected by this. But people in specific schools and colleges, you know this in a way that we don't. And I suspect you are more effective at having some of those joint conversations, working with your communications people to try to get that word out of, this is really going to impact you, and see if there's some ways to work together. But if we can be helpful, with our central legislative affairs folks as well, you should make sure that your folks get in touch with us.
Anyone else? Any other questions? No? Really?
All right, we can all go home.
Okay. Yeah, we've got that taken
Thank you
care of.
very much.
Thank you.